The Justice Department just the last hour charged a former senior Federal Reserve official with conspiracy to commit economic espionage. The justice says a 63-year-old John Harold Rogers is alleged to have passed, quote, sensitive trade secret information from the Federal Reserve to co-conspirators in China.
A senior member of the Federal Reserve Board has been sentenced to 38 months in federal prison with 12 months of supervised release thereafter.
Good afternoon, beautiful people, and happy Thursday. So if you thought that concerns about Chinese espionage were limited to military secrets or defense contractors, then you better think again. A former senior advisor at the Federal Reserve has now been sentenced to more than 3 years in federal prison after lying to investigators about his connections to individuals linked to Chinese intelligence. While a jury did not convict him of economic espionage, prosecutors argued that he secretly shared sensitive Federal Reserve information and then repeatedly lied when questioned about it. Let's talk about why this case matters and why it raises more questions about America's economic security. Welcome to Nellie Miranda. As always, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Okay, so for years, John Harold Rogers worked inside one of the most influential financial institutions in the world, the Federal Reserve. He worked there from 2010 until 2021. Rogers served as a senior advisor in the Fed's Division of International Finance, giving him access to sensitive economic research, financial market analysis, and information used to help shape monetary policy. Now, according to the Justice Department, John Rogers developed relationships with individuals who prosecutors say were connected to China's intelligence apparatus while presenting themselves as graduate students and academics. Federal prosecutors alleged that he provided confidential Federal Reserve information to these contacts over several years. They originally charged him with conspiring to commit economic espionage on behalf of China, which is a very serious accusation.
Rogers was said specifically to solicit briefing books for governors, proprietary data sets, and sensitive information about FOMC deliberations. Apparently, he printed this info out or sent it to his personal email in violation of Federal Reserve rules in preparation for trips to China. Rogers allegedly made false statements to the Federal Reserve's Inspector General about accessing and passage of this information, as well as its association with co-conspirators. He worked as a Fed senior advisor in the Division of International Finance from 2010 to 2021. These alleged actions ran from 2013 to 2025. In the indictment, it says that's even after he left the Fed. The Justice Department says the info was passed that Rogers passed was, quote, economically valuable. They went on to say that the data provided could allow China to manipulate U.S. markets. He provided info, quote, under the guise of teaching classes. The indictment cites two unnamed co-conspirators who the indictment says worked for the Chinese intelligence apparatus and presented themselves as graduate students. He was paid $450,000 in 2023 as a part-time professor at a Chinese university.
However, when the case went to trial, the jury reached a split verdict. They acquitted Rogers of the economic espionage conspiracy charge, but then they convicted him of making false statements to federal investigators after concluding that he lied during the investigation about sharing restricted Federal Reserve information. And then this week, a federal judge sentenced him to 38 months in prison, followed by 1 year of supervised release. Prosecutors had requested a 5-year sentence, so he got off kind of easy. But here's U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro talking about the sentence. Take a listen.
In one of the longest sentences ever given for making false statements to federal investigators, a senior member of the Federal Reserve Board has been sentenced to 38 months in federal prison with 12 months of supervised release thereafter for his role in giving sensitive economic information to a Chinese operative. What this defendant would do is he would get Federal Reserve information and information that was classified, and he would take the classification marks off, send this stuff to his own email, and then forward this stuff to this Chinese operative. He sold out his country and other members of the Federal Reserve Board, and he hid behind a lie. And you can't hide behind the lie because he told investigators he never did it. And he lied at trial. He said he never did it. And as a result, he's gotten one of the highest sentences ever in a false statement case. And in the end, he said he owed everything to the Chinese operative. Maybe he ought to rethink that one.
Now, here's what makes this story especially interesting. Some people may hear not guilty of espionage and automatically assume that the case completely fell apart. That is not what happened. The jury just did not find sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict Rogers of conspiring to commit economic espionage. But they did conclude that he knowingly lied to investigators during the federal investigation. Now, according to the sentencing judge, this wasn't viewed as an ordinary false statements case because of Rogers' senior position and the sensitive nature of the information involved. The judge also pointed to what she described as a pattern of sharing confidential information with contacts in China. Rogers has continued to deny that he has ever spied for China, saying that he was deceived by people he believed were legitimate academics. Cases like this also highlight why U.S. counterintelligence officials have repeatedly warned that foreign governments actively seek economic and financial intelligence, not just military secrets. The Federal Reserve isn't simply another government agency. Its work influences interest rates, inflation expectations, financial markets, and economic policies watched by governments and investors around the world. Even information that isn't formally classified can still be highly sensitive if obtained improperly. And I think that is one of the main reasons that prosecutors pursue this case so aggressively. But what do you think? Did prosecutors strike the right balance after the jury acquitted Rogers of espionage but convicted him of lying? Or do you think that this case raises even bigger concerns about how foreign governments attempt to gain access to sensitive U.S. institutions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But while we are on the topic of the Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook says that she is prepared to act if the recent progress on inflation stalls, signaling that interest rates could increase if prices remain way too high. Lisa Cook said that she is willing to wait a little longer to see more economic data, but she made it very clear that the Fed's commitment to getting inflation back to its 2% target has not changed. According to her, inflation risks now outweighs concerns about the job market. That is a shift from where policymakers were just a year ago. In this article, she said, quote, "If we do not see signs of disinflation soon, I am prepared to act. I am fully committed to reaching our inflation target, and this commitment is unwavering. In fact, I see few reasons that today's labor market has more risks than a year earlier. Therefore, risks on the employment side have been diminished. The balance of risks has teetered toward the inflation mandate." End quote. She also pointed to several factors that could keep prices elevated, including tariffs, heavy investment in artificial intelligence, and instability in the Middle East. For everyday Americans, this matters because if the Fed decides that inflation isn't coming down fast enough, borrowing could become even more expensive. That could affect mortgage rates, credit cards, auto loans, and business financing. But at the same time, Fed officials are trying to avoid acting too quickly because if they tighten monetary policy more than necessary, then it could slow economic growth and put pressure on the labor market. So do you think that the Feds should raise interest rates again to get inflation under control, or has keeping rates high already gone way too far? I think it's gone too far because 6 or 7% on a mortgage rate is criminal. But let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you got any value from today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss any future updates. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.